Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Sporting my UMBC hat here on the WNST webcam on Facebook Live and our YouTube WNSTV channel. Looking forward to seeing everyone at State Fair in Catonsville with what I'm saying is the top dog, Freeman Rabowski, the good doctor at UMBC. We're going to be talking about all sorts of Baltimore positive things with Don Moeller. That happens on Thursday morning, and you can find that out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault as well as at BaltimorePositive.com. This is a Baltimore positive guy. Here's a pretty positive day, I think, out in Owings Mills on Wednesday as our partner in crime, Brian Billick, on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation, so much the coach has done for us, including Luke Jones, who joins us now to talk about not just Brian going into the Ring of Honor, Haloti Hgata retiring as a Raven, and Steve Bisciotti coming out from wherever he was to say hello to everyone and do the PSL thing on Wednesday night. We got a new Oriole, so interesting little weekend here as I do a little getaway with my wife on her birthday weekend, Luke.
Yeah, it really was, and I think a good day for the Ravens on Wednesday. Certainly their second week of OTAs this week as they're getting closer and closer to mandatory minicamp in a couple weeks. But good time to say farewell to one of the greatest Ravens in the history of this franchise in Haloti Hgata. I think it's one thing to look at the Pro Bowls. It's one thing to look at his own individual production, but when I see Haloti Hgata, I also think about what ended up being Act 2 of Ray Lewis's career. I mean, that was a very volatile time, 2005, when Ray Lewis was hurt and was away from the team and was disenchanted and talked about wanting a new contract, talked about wanting to be traded if the Ravens weren't going to find basically a Haloti Hgata type defensive tackle to keep blockers off of him. And they bring in Ngata, and that appeases Ray Lewis in some way. But not just that, he was one of the, 6 or 7 best players in team history.
And that's an amazing thing, right? Like, if he were in Jacksonville, he would have been their best. You know what I mean? Like, if he's in a different franchise, you talk about Ed Reed getting overshadowed by Ray Lewis.
Sure.
How about, all of the really good players we've had around here that have been overshadowed by Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, right? Like, literally, even Flacco to some degree, and any Marshall Yanda, Justin Tucker, any of these guys, they're never going to be Ray, in the same way I guess Artie Donovan and Jim Parker were never Johnny U, right?
Sure. Throw Terrell Suggs in there.
Oh, I forgot about him.
Yeah.
Is he gone already? I miss him.
So, it speaks to what kind of player Ngata was, and he was someone that I think you look at his somewhere around 2012 moving forward after that, and certainly in Detroit and Philadelphia after he moved on from the Ravens, was traded in the offseason following 2014. Wasn't the same player, but over his first 6-7 seasons, he's a guy that you very easily could have envisioned being a Hall of Fame talent. And I know Ozzie Newsome talked about him checking boxes. I'm guessing Haloti Hgata is not a Hall of Famer. I wouldn't put him in that category.
Well, by the way, if his last 6 years look like Suggs' last 6 years, maybe. You know
exactly,
what I mean?
And that's my point, right? I mean, the first half of his career very much looked like a Hall of Fame track, but it's also, it speaks to how impressive, how special, how much guys like Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, and even throw Terrell Suggs in there to a lesser extent, generational kind of talents that could do it for well over a decade at an incredibly high level. Ngata got close, and I'm sure he'll be on some of those lists, and people will sing his praises, but I think he'll probably come up short in the end. But still a really, really, really good career and one of the all-time Ravens. And like I said, I still think part of his legacy is he was a huge factor in Ray Lewis kind of having Act 2 of his brilliant Hall of Fame career, because I think because we didn't have social media to the extent that we do today, I think people forget just how volatile that time was and how unhappy Ray Lewis was at that time. And not that the Ravens drafted Haloti Hgata solely for that reason, but it certainly helped. And I think it took what was certainly still a really good defense in the mid-portion of the first decade of this millennium and took it to another level. And Haloti Hgata kind of anchoring that defensive line. I mean, you couldn't ask for anyone better for, like I said, that 6 or 7, his first 6-7 years in the league. There wasn't a defensive tackle better than him. There were guys as good as him. There wasn't anyone better than Haloti Hgata for that time period.
6 years later, we look back on that Super Bowl team, and, I remember all facets of being there and being a part of it and all the craziness that ensued in the aftermath. But we look back now all these years later, and, we knew Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were going to the Hall of Fame, right? Like, we knew that whether they won or lost the game on that last play or that last series, that was kind of true. But the rest of these guys that were a part of this thing, for Flacco and obviously Ray Rice and Dennis Pitta, these guys that were emerging guys at that point, as well as Ngata, who was an arrived guy at that point, to say what happens in the aftermath for the franchise, for their legacy, for the Hall of Fame, for all of that stuff. I mean, Burke, Bolden, Yanda, Tucker still in the middle of all of this, and he might be a Hall of Famer. So you get all of these guys, Suggs, as you pointed out, that we're going to be talking about in the coming years. But, Ngata, again, gets lost in the cracks of all of that. I just mentioned all of those guys, and, we just retired Haloti Hgata. Yeah, he's pretty good, wasn't he? And I think this week was a week to come back and talk about that a little bit, because I don't know when you and I ever talked about that the day he was dealt off to Detroit. It was more like, probably a good trade, Oz. I mean, literally, right? I don't know that any of us thought, oh, my God, we shouldn't do that, right?
Yeah, and Haloti even talked about it during his press conference on Wednesday, where he acknowledged, his cap figure that year, I want to say, was $16 million off the top of my head. He wasn't a $16 million player anymore. He just wasn't. So there's a business element to this. We saw this with Joe Flacco. If Joe Flacco didn't have the cap figure that he had in 2019, the Ravens very well may not draft Lamar Jackson in 2018. That's the nature of the beast. At some point in time, everyone's expiration date comes. Very few, like Ray Lewis, decide for themselves, and then everyone else, it's decided for them in some way, whether they're traded, whether they're released, whether they're just simply unsigned. We see that on so many occasions where someone is kind of retired because, no one wants them anymore. So I think in the case of Ngata, it is nice to have this come full circle. And for me, it was really, and I can't imagine for you having covered it, but for me, just having remembered it as a fan at that point in my life, but to see Ozzie Newsome, Brian Billick, and Haloti Hgata sitting up there in front of the media.
Well, I took that picture, dude. If you haven't seen the picture on our Twitter or Facebook, go look at it. And Billick's got his arm up, and the screens behind them all, and they're staring at it. It was quite a scene, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's if you squint and think back, it's 2006 all over again. So that was pretty cool. And again, Haloti certainly deserved his day in the sun. And I know sometimes people mock some of these, one-day contract, retire as a whoever, whatever team you're talking about. And the Ravens have even had some guys come back and retire as a Raven, where you'd kind of say, I don't know if that was really necessary. For someone like Haloti Hgata, it was incredibly appropriate because, again, wherever you rank him, he's somewhere in that top 6 or 7. Lewis, Reed, Ogden, obvious, Suggs, Flacco fits in there somewhere, Marshall Yanda fits in there somewhere, Jamal Lewis fits in there somewhere. So, you just go down the list, but Haloti is in that really short group of the top 6, 7, 8 players in franchise history. And like I said, at one point in his career, you thought that he was going to be another guy joining Lewis and Ogden and Reed and probably Suggs in the Hall of Fame. But the second half of his career just wasn't quite as impactful, but still great legacy that Haloti Hgata leaves behind, and fun to see him come home. And I'd say something that was anticipated, even if the end of his time with the Ravens was pretty abrupt and ended up being the trade that I think wasn't stunning, but still not the most flattering way for someone to depart.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there is no flattering way for anybody to depart other than Ray Lewis, right? And Jerome Bettis, maybe. Here's Luke Jones. He's Luke at WNST.net and Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. All of our WNST program, we have such great sponsors. We've signed up a bunch of new sponsors. I put the cups like Royal Farms and Pizza John's and Strategic Factory. I drink my my Hydrate out of Strategic Factory. I drink my coffee, my Royal Farms coffee, strangely enough, out of my Cole Roofing mug. But and I'm wearing my UMBC dog hat today because we're at State Fair. I'll be in Catonsville eating a delicious, probably the Chesapeake Benedict. I don't know, probably the chicken and waffles as well because I can do that sort of thing. Don Moeller picks off my plate. It's nice. We're going to be over there this Thursday. We have incredible Baltimore positive stuff going on. We've had commitments from Ben Cardin. Mayor Young is joining us later on in the month on the 20th. Nancy Grasmick is joining us. Johnny O. We're going to be talking to the movers and shakers and the people that are making Baltimore great. We have such great sponsors and awesome support around here. Hope everybody goes out, supports us all summer long. I am working on a Hall of Fame summer package in July and August with baseball, rock and roll, football, some really cool greatest hits stuff this summer as I work on my Baltimore Positive Initiative. One last sponsor shout out. Sydney is doing 50% off bands. It's wedding bands. My wife got hers fixed over there at Charles Newsonoff and Sons. They're in Parkville. You can find them. You've heard the jingle. Make sure you get over there and say hello to Sid because I know he's listening. Top of the day, Sid. Sorry about the Mets. Luke, for the Brian Billick thing, I'm just going to let you go on about this because, I mean, look, Brian's been my partner for, going on 12, 13 years now. I have obviously a different sort of relationship with him, always have, literally from the minute we met. I've written 2 books about that now. And to see him back in there, it wasn't weepy for me, but to see Kim walk in and to have it be like sort of throwback day, I mean, right, in some sort of weird way, and for John to sort of get out of the way, and I know he was doing his thing, and I don't think that was particularly designed. I mean, it was kind of OTA, whatever, and John puts his picture up with all the young guys out at his pool and whatnot. This is overdue on the Brian thing. I've spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours with Brian Billick in my life here at this point to know his side of the story, and one of the things that I find so fascinating about Brian in the afterglow of all of this is that Brian takes it all in stride. In real life, in the car when we're driving around and you see us out when we're having dinner at Ruth's Chris, when we're on the phone together doing radio, when we're at the Super Bowl together, when you and I are having a steak with him in San Francisco at a Super Bowl, Brian takes it all in stride. And I don't know, man. I've never known Brian to have a bad day. And I think this one, he wasn't over the top, but it was a nice coming home thing, and I think Brian sort of took it in stride, and I took a funny selfie that I'm going to post later of both of us having silver hair and him still talking to the media all these years later, but it was a really nice day for Brian. It was a nice day, quite frankly, for my heart, right? And I think for Steve to get up later, and all I could think about in that moment, Luke, and I know you weren't there that day, but the day that Steve fired Brian, tears in his eyes all swollen, this dark, somber press conference that I don't know that I've ever watched it again or replayed it. I think I replayed it when I wrote the book in 13 because I wanted to relive it a little bit to begin the book with that setting of Steve looking for his next Hall of Fame coach, as he's talked about, and he may be on the pathway. I mean, John wins 2 rings with Lamar Jackson. John's going to the Hall of Fame, right? So he's still in play for that. Now, Brian comes back with a whole different resume at this point, and when Steve was standing up there and turning to Brian, all I could think about was that day with Steve, where Steve was just like, I just fired a guy that won the Super Bowl. I better be right. And I remember Steve saying that and bringing it all full circle. It took, 12 years, 13 years, whatever it's been. It was a nice day for Brian, a nice day for Steve, a nice thing for Purple, a nice thing for Haloti and Ozzy and Kevin Byrne and anybody else that remembers when Brian built that building. And I was fortunate enough to have lunch with Matt Stover, and you joined us as well for a short period of time, as did Peter DeLutis at a Silver Spring Mining Company, where we're watching Game 1 of the finals on Thursday night. And to see Matt Stover pound on the table in Hunt Valley and say, Brian changed everything. I was there. You were there. You know it. I know it. I'm going to bring Matt on next week to talk about that because I haven't tooted Brian's horn enough around here over the last 12 years, but Brian Billick's a really special guy. I'm 50 years old. I haven't met a more special guy than Brian Billick.